Welcome to Lesson 36, which roughly covers pages 221 to 225 of the Automate the Boring Stuff with Python textbook. If you've ever put a print function call in your code to output some variable's value while your program is running, you've used some form of logging to debug your code. Logging is a great way to understand what's happening in your program and in what order it's happening. Python's logging module makes it easy to create a record of custom messages that you write. To enable the logging module to display log messages on your screen as your program runs, put the following at the top somewhere at the beginning of your program. First, you'll import the logging module, and then you'll call the logging module's basic config function and pass it the level keyword equals logging.debug, and the format keyword you pass it a string %asktime s, %level name s, and %message s. You don't need to worry too much about how this works. Just know that this is the setup code for logging in Python. So let's do an example with a function that calculates factorial. In mathematics, factorial 4 is 1 times 2 times 3 times 4, or 24. And factorial 7 is 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7, or 5040. Let's write a function that will calculate factorials for us. Open a new file editor window and enter the following code. It has a bug in it, and we'll later use log messages to help us figure out this bug and where it's going wrong. So let's create a function factorial that has a parameter in. We'll start a total variable at 1, then just loop over a range of integers from 0 to n plus 1, so that way it includes 1. We'll just have total multiplied by I, and then after that loop, we'll just return total. Now let's just print out an example. The factorial of 5 will be printed to the screen. I'll just save this as example.py, and then press F5 to run it. And it turns out here the factorial of 5 is 0. That doesn't seem right. There must be some kind of bug in this program. And we can use log messages to get an idea of what's going on at each step in this program. So in order to do this, we'll have to import the logging module. We'll have to call that basic config function. I'll just copy and paste that here. And then we can start adding log messages with the debug function and pass it some string for each message. So I'll just say start a program right here. Maybe at the end, just have end of program. And here I'll just say start of factorial. And I'll use string formatting here so that we put in inside of there. And maybe another one on each iteration of this loop. We'll have logging.debug, just say I is set to here, and total is %s, and let's put I for that first %s, and total for that next %s. And then at the very end of the function, I'll just say return value is %s. That'll be total. So now when we run this function, each of these debug function calls are kind of like print function calls. Except there's a lot more information that they give. For one, they provide us with a timestamp of when exactly this is happening. And then also right here is the debug log level. And this is because we called the debug function. Log levels will be explained in a little bit. And then the message that we passed it as a string is given right here. So we can see at the very start, I is set to 0, and so total is 0. But then when I is set to 1, total is still 0. When I is set to 2, the total is still 0. So something is obviously happening right here. And if we look at our code, we're going to realize, oh, okay, well, we started total at 1 because we wanted to have 1 times 1, and then that total times 2, and then total times 3, and so on. But what we're doing is multiplying it by 0 on the very first iteration, because this range function is starting at 0, and really we want it to start at 1. Now before, when we ran this without the logging messages, we just got the return value as 0, so we had no idea where this was going wrong. And it's kind of really subtle that we forget, oh right, range begins at 0 if you just provide it with one argument. But in the two argument form, we can also give the starting integer as well as the stopping integer. So let's save this and run this now, and we can see that it returns 120. So these debug function calls are pretty much the exact same thing as print. The timestamp that they add is kind of nice, but why don't we just have, print instead? We were using that before. Why can't we just keep adding that? Well, one thing you'll notice is this is a lot of text that's spitting out, and this text is really helpful when we're trying to debug our program or when we're writing our program, but we eventually want to take all of this out. Now, if we had been doing this with print function calls, we basically have to find all of these print function calls and then just select them and then delete them, or maybe just comment them out. But there's a problem with that in that sometimes we actually want a print function call. Like right here, we wouldn't want to accidentally delete this thinking it was some sort of debug message. But if we use the debug function in the logging module, there's a really simple way that we can just turn off all of these logging messages. That's just by calling logging here at the top. Just call logging.disable and pass it logging.critical. So now when we run this program, that disables all the log messages. So this is kind of nice. If we ever want them back, we can just comment this out and then run the program again. So logging.debug and logging.critical are called log levels. And there are 5 log levels: debug, the lowest level, info, warning, error, and critical. Now the names aren't really that important. Just realize that there's 5 levels going from the lowest to the highest. And when you call logging.debug, you're creating a log message at the debug level. There's also a logging.info, logging.warning, logging.error, and also logging.critical. Each of these prints a log message at a different log level. And what this logging.disable does is it says, okay, I want you to disable all log messages at the critical level or lower. And since critical is the highest level, this disables all of them. Now in your program, you can call the different logging functions based on the priority of that message. So say this message wasn't really that important at all, we could just leave it at logging.debug. Debug is the lowest level. But say this was really important, or more important, we could just call it at info, which is a slightly higher level. Now sometimes you might have messages that would indicate a warning, which it means something could possibly go wrong, or error, meaning that something has gone wrong, or even that critical level, which means that not only has something gone wrong, but it's also something that should cause the program to stop immediately. If you want to hide all of the debug messages, but you want to keep all of the info, warning, and error and critical logging messages, you can just disable the debug level and below. Or you could, say, disable the warning level messages and below. Passing critical will, in effect, disable all the logging messages. And ultimately, it's up to you whether or not you decide a message for a logging message is important enough to be at debug or critical or warning or whatever. Now, instead of displaying the log messages to the screen, you can also write them to a text file. If you want to write all of these log messages to a file, just change this basic config call and add file name equals, and just type the file name that you want it to write to. I'm going to say myprogramlog.txt. This is a relative path name, so this will just be written to this file name in the current working directory. So now, when I run the program, instead of being displayed to the screen, all of the logging messages are saved to this file. So I'm going to run this, and none of the logging messages appeared on the screen. But if I open up the File Explorer, I'll see that myprogramlog.txt has been created, and that has all of the log messages I need. To recap, the logging module lets you display logging messages. The log messages create a breadcrumb trail of what your program is doing. After calling basic config to set up logging, call logging.debug to create a log message. And when you're done, you can disable the log messages by calling logging.disable and passing logging.critical to it. So don't use print for log messages. They're really hard to remove when you're done debugging. The 5 log levels are debug, the lowest, info, warning, error, and critical. You can also log to a file instead of the screen with the file name keyword argument to the basic config function.